1 second, and you can start.
I'm not going to see the people on Facebook, or I will?
No, you're not going to see the people on Facebook, but you can start. You're live.
Okay. Hope that this finds everyone well. Greetings from Yerushalayim. There's a very interesting disagreement between the world and the Torah regarding how we relate to our own self-worth. I mean, what's a person worth? What is it that gives a person that understanding that they're worth something and that they're worthy of being? Generally, the world will call it accomplishments. That a person's self-worth is based on their accomplishments. The more they accomplish, the more the person is a serious person and a person who can deserve respect and should get respect, etc., etc. And therefore, a person is driven to accomplish a lot in order to be able to think about himself and be seen in the eyes of others. So, but of course, it starts with our basic understanding of ourself. That I'll think of myself as a person who's a serious person worth the respect of others. Not God forbid, in a haughty way, but in a healthy way. That my self-worth is based on my accomplishments. That can start in childhood, that we might praise the child for the positive things that a child does. And sometimes we might say things that might be considered the opposite of praise if a child does something that we don't think is necessarily what a child should do. Right? But obviously in terms of adulthood, so the importance of a person and the notion of a person being worthy of respect and honor will depend on what they accomplish. Now, of course, that'll also depend on the society that they live in a society of musicians. So then obviously it'll be accomplishments in the realm of music. In the society of intellectuals, it'll be accomplishment in the realm of intellectual endeavor, whether they have many degrees or have written certain books, if it's medicine or law or whatever it happens to be. If it happens to be in terms of making money, that a person has shown a lot of respect because they happen to be very accomplished at making money. All sorts of different ways in which a person can relate to himself in a positive way and expect other people to relate to him in a positive way. The Torah looks at things differently. The Torah's basic understanding, and this is God's basic understanding because this is God is the one who wrote the Torah, is that every single one of us has infinite self-worth. A person is worthy of honor and respect simply because they're created by a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And what's the first step in that process is that when I relate to myself as a person who's worth something, despite the fact that perhaps at this particular point I might not have accomplished as much as I would want to. Accomplishments. But that I'm worth something. Why? Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu created me. And that means other people are also worth something because the Kadosh Baruch Hu created them. And every one of us actually has infinite self-worth because the source of our reality is an infinite and ultimately beyond infinite being. Because ultimately when we talk about a Kadosh Baruch Hu as God, as infinite, that's really a misnomer. God is not infinite because infinite reality is limited. How is it limited? It can't express itself in a finite way. And that's why the philosophers ask, how can an infinite God create a finite world? And it's not a very good question. Why? Because God's not infinite. It's based on a misnomer. God's beyond infinite. He's completely unlimited. He's not limited by infinite reality, and he's not limited by finite reality. And that God is the source of my being. That's where I come from. There was an old poster in Lubavitch, 60s, early 60s, when outreach was just beginning and Chabad houses hadn't started yet. That was already the 70s. The Rebbe started talking about the idea of Chabad house. But the notion of Chabad involved in education was beginning. And There was a poster that actually I'd never seen it since I was once talking in a university campus, and I mentioned this poster, and one of the kids, today everybody can find everything you're looking for. One of the kids was listening with one ear and Googling with his eyes, and he found the poster and he showed it to me. I'd never seen it, but I'd heard about it. The poster was a young man, a boy, 12, 13, 10, and he had, I think it was called the Young Rascals or the Little Rascals. I think the Young Rascals. He had that look of the late 50s, white shirt, a leather jacket, white t-shirt, a cap, a leather cap, and a look of defiance. And it was very clear that this young man was not necessarily the best at reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's not what he was so good at, right? And that was pretty clear from looking at it. And yet, what did the poster say at the bottom? An incredibly powerful message. God don't make junk. I'm not junk. God makes things that are worth something. Everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu made is worth something. The rivers HaKadosh Baruch Hu made are worth something, so we don't pollute them simply because it's convenient. We have respect for them. That doesn't mean we don't have factories, but we do things in a way that shows respect for the world that God created. So too we show respect to the people that God created. The animals God created, we're not allowed to hurt animals in a way that's unnecessary. But also relative to ourselves. How do we relate to ourselves? How do I see myself? What makes me someone worth something? Is it because I happen to have accomplished all sorts of things? No. It happens to be because HaKadosh Baruch Hu created me, and therefore I am of infinite worth. I might become very haughty. Don't become so haughty. If it weren't the time of Corona, I could tell you, look at the guy sitting next to you. He's also of infinite worth. There just might not be anybody sitting next to you because we're not sitting next to anybody these days. But if we're in a room of 20 people, look around the room. The other 19 people have exactly the same infinite self-worth as you do, so don't get so excited. But get excited. Why? Because it completely changes the way we relate to our life. And what do I mean? If my self-worth is based on what I accomplish, I will probably set the bar relatively low because I'm afraid of failure. Because if I fail, I'm not worth anything. Because only people who accomplish things are worth something. And if I fail at it, so I'm a loser. I'm a failure. That's not true. I'm not a loser. I'm not a failure. I tried something very hard and I didn't succeed, so I have a choice. Often the hardest choice in the world. Do I try again because I'm being told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm being told by God, try a little harder and it'll work the next time? Or am I being told, maybe this isn't for you, you should try something else? The hardest question to answer often in life. But that aside, I'll shoot for the moon if failure doesn't crush me. But if my self-worth is based on what I accomplished, then failure will crush me because I'm a failure. No, I'm not. I'm not a failure. I simply didn't succeed at this particular thing for whatever reason. I didn't try hard enough. I made a mistake. I had the wrong information, or it might be that I'm better suited to do something else, whatever it happens to be. If my self-worth is based on only that which I accomplished, I'll set the bar very low because I won't want to fail. And it's very interesting. I mentioned this to a friend of mine. We were talking about it, and he said there happens to be a very interesting survey. This was a couple of years ago. I assume things are pretty much the same. People under the age of 40, they did a survey. People under the age of 40, investment behavior, very conservative. Why? Perhaps a lack of feeling about themselves that they're really worth something. So they might, failing in investing will be an absolute disaster. Obviously, there's the financial ramifications of it all, but what's more important is the feeling about myself. So I'll invest very carefully and very, very, very conservatively in order not to fail. I don't want to lose. I can't lose. Because if I lose, I'm a loser. And that's not true. That's not true. Everybody who ever did anything real in life failed more than they succeeded until they ultimately succeeded at this thing, whatever it happens to be. Every major development in science, every major development in any field, in learning Torah, when we encounter we might not understand it at first. Okay, well, exactly. That's why I'm now challenging myself to understand something that I couldn't understand before. I only learn things I understand, and I don't learn anything. But I got it. I was successful. It's not about being successful. It's about doing things to find just how far I can go and how much I can accomplish. Now, what about accomplishments? After all, I might say, well, I have this infinite self-worth, so I don't have to do anything. Why bother doing anything? Just sit back and enjoy being me in some bizarre way. No. What's an accomplishment? And the Rebbe talks about this so often. What's an accomplishment? An accomplishment, doing something positive in the world is an expression of who we are. It doesn't make us who we are. We are something astounding. Now go express that in the world and do astounding things. One of the parshas that is Kadeshim Tiyu. You should be holy. The Rebbe explains in Tafshin Mem Ches 1988. The Rebbe explained in the Shabbos for Brengen on that verse, Kadeshim Tiyu. You are holy. And then the weekly portion talks about all sorts of mitzvahs, all sorts of commandments that we have to do. So you might think, how is it I become holy? I do these commandments. The Rebbe says, no. Exactly the opposite. What's the first thing God says in the parsha, in the weekly? Since you're holy, you have to do all these mitzvahs. Because holy people express themselves this way. You don't become holy because you do mitzvahs, the Rebbe says. You are holy, so therefore you get to do mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are an expression of that holiness. And so go do mitzvahs. Go do commandments. Go act in a certain way that's in line with who you really are. And that way of looking at the world is revolutionary and will change the way I see myself, change the way I see everybody else, change the way I see my wife, my children, my husband, everything will be different. Because I'm not worried about the accomplishment as the source of some sort of positive self-image. The accomplishment is an expression of the positive self-image. And then the world can be conquered very, very, very easily, so to speak. I remember once speaking at a college campus. It was the University of Illinois, in the Chabad house there, Rabbi Techtel, beautiful Chabad house. And there were about 25 or 30 students. And Rabbi Techtel told me they might be a little bit distracted because it's exam time, and tomorrow a lot of them have a very important exam. Fine, but they were there. They're actually there. The beginning of the class was Sinai Scholars, was JLI Sinai Scholars. You've heard of that amazing program. So it was Sinai Scholars class, and I spoke to the last 20 minutes, and there were other students who also weren't part of the Sinai Scholars who came for the last 20 minutes. And we talked about this general idea, and I asked them a question. You have tests tomorrow. Yeah, okay. Let me ask you a question. Is your self-image going to improve by virtue of the fact that you do well on this test? Is it dependent on how you do on this test? Will you think less of yourself if you don't do so well? And most of the students said yes. I said, okay, fine. Let me ask you another question. They were listening, by this way. It's very interesting. They were very quiet and they were listening. So what about your parents' feelings about you? Do you think your parents feel love? But are their feelings about you in terms of you being, a failure or a success going to be dependent a little bit on the mark that you're going to get on this test tomorrow? So they said, yeah, that could be. So, okay. Can I ask one more question? They said, yeah. They were a little nervous about the next question. So, what about your parents' own image of themselves relative to the mark you get on this test tomorrow? Might their image of themselves change if you get a positive mark as opposed to a negative, not such a good mark? And they all burst out laughing. Nervous laughter. They were an incredible group. They burst out laughing. They said, probably that their parents' own self-image is based on whether or not their child gets an A in the University of Illinois. So it was quiet in the room. That's a tremendous amount of pressure to put on a 19 or 20-year-old child, young adult. That's a tremendous amount of pressure. This test is testing you your parents' relationship to you and your parents' relationship to themselves. Now, go be happy. Whoa, that's a lot of pressure. I don't think I could stand up to that pressure. And as a matter of fact, it might be that most college students can't stand up to that pressure. And unfortunately, we know a lot of things going on in college might be a result of that pressure. That's not real. Those parents should have a positive self-image of themselves as people and as parents, irrespective of whether this child gets an A or B or a C or a D on their math test. Illinois, which itself is an accomplishment because it's a good school. Okay. But that doesn't mean I'm worth more or worth less because I happen to be in the University of Illinois. God don't make junk. Every single one of us is created in his image, and every single one of us, therefore, is of infinite self-worth. And now let's go express that in what we do without necessarily fearing failure. Though obviously I have to look for success. I want to accomplish what should be accomplished, not because it makes me understand that I'm worth something, but because the world needs that which hopefully I'm about to accomplish. It's good for the world. It's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. It's what God wants. There's an amazing teaching, Chassidic discourse, a mimer of the Rebbe. It's called Tefillah LaMoshe, the prayer of Moshe, Moses' prayer. And the Rebbe, the Rebbe brings a medrash, rabbinic sources, the difference between the prayer of Moshe and the prayer of David HaMelech, the prayer of King David. Moshe Rabbeinu is called Tfilas HaOsher. The David HaMelech, King David, his prayer is called Tfilah La'oni, the prayer of the poor, poverty-stricken one. And the mimer, the Chassidic discourse, explains the difference between those two types of prayer. But the Rebbe asks a very, very powerful question. What's prayer? Prayer is simply a response to a lacking. We'll pray to God, the main body of Shemona Esrei, the silent Amida prayer, the main body, the blessings every day that we say 3 times a day are all requests for things that we're lacking, that we need, because we feel a lacking and we turn to God to help us with that lacking, to fill those blanks. So the Rebbe asks, well, what is Moshe daven about? Tefillah la'ashir, the prayer of the rich one. What is the rich one daven about? He's not lacking anything. Now, when we say rich, we don't mean that Moshe Rabbeinu has a lot of money. He might have had that too. He actually did have that. But when we say tefillah la'ashir, we're talking about someone who is existentially rich, someone who doesn't lack. Tefillah la'oni, the prayer of the poverty-stricken one, is the one who experiences his lackings very powerfully and prays in an attempt to deal with them, overcome them, and fill up those missing those spaces. Tefillah la'ashir, which is the prayer of Moshe. It's the 90th chapter, Tefillah LaMoshe, the 90th chapter of Tehillim. Though there are those who say that Moshe wrote, rabbis say the next 10 chapters, 90 through up until 100, that Moshe wrote those psalms. What's the Tefillah La'ashir? What is the prayer of the rich one? He's not lacking. So the first answer the Rebbe gives is, he must be praying for our lacking. Since we're lacking, so then the usher prays that we should be able to overcome our deficiencies and our lackings. But the Rebbe, in an amazing paragraph, dismisses that because of the incredible connection between Moshe and the Jewish people. Were there any lacking in the Jewish people, that lacking would be felt by and expressed in Moshe himself. And so the Rebbe dismisses that as a possibility and says, there, because after all, he's called the Asher, he's called the rich one. There's no lacking whatsoever, not even in terms of his relationship to someone else. And Moshe is very much the one who experiences our experiences and lives our lives so completely bound up with us. And so if we're lacking, that lacking affects him. So then what could it possibly mean to tefillah l'Moshe, that Moshe davens, Moshe prays? Prayer you would think is a response to a lacking, and that's called the tefillah l'Asher, the prayer of the one who's rich, the one who lacks nothing. So what does he pray for? The Rebbe says an amazing thing. And very often when we talk about the Rebbe, we talk about someone who challenges us constantly to go beyond the limitations that we feel are constraining us. And the Rebbe, I remember the first video that Jem came out with, the first fancy video that Jem came out with, as I recall, was called Challenge. And it was a compilation of the Rebbe challenging people. The Rebbe saying, when people would say they did something, the Rebbe would say, well, do you expect me to be satisfied with that? I want more. The Rebbe is constantly asking for more. It's quick. We're near the end. I just quickly tell a story that just thought of a student. She was actually a madricha, one of the counselors in the seminary here in Yerushalayim, Machon Shoshnat Yerushalayim. Shena Paim from Brazil, wonderful girl. So her father once took one of his balabatim, one of the people who's in his Chabad house in Brazil. He took him to the Rebbe for bringing, and this person understood no Yiddish. And at the end of the Farbrengen, he was nodding throughout the whole thing. He enjoyed the Farbrengen so much, and he was really enjoying it. At the end, Rabbi Paim asked him, "You enjoyed this? Oh, it's fantastic." So he said, "What did you enjoy? You enjoyed the L'chaim?" And the Rebbe said, "L'chaim." He said, "Yeah, I like that very much." He said, "Did you enjoy the Nigunim, the Hasidic songs?" He said, "Oh, I like that very much." He said, "Which one of those two did you like best?" He said, "No, what I liked best was what the Rebbe was saying." So he said, "I don't understand. You don't understand Yiddish. How do you understand what the Rebbe is saying?" He said, "No, I got the gist of it." He said, "Well, what did the Rebbe say?" He said, the Rebbe kept saying, "V'oid v'ho'ikr," and furthermore, and this is the essential point. Now, the Rebbe says that in the context of making a conceptual point. Furthermore, and this is the conceptual point of the idea, the most essential point of the idea. But what do those words mean simply? Oid, for more, v'ho'ikr, and that's the essence. More, that's what's important. So he heard those words. More, that's what's important. And the Rebbe said, so the Rebbe kept asking for more. Do more, that's what's important. More, that's what's important. So now the Rebbe didn't mean it in that context. But the Shaliach said, you know what, you really did. You understood completely what the Rebbe was talking about, because that is what the Rebbe talks about all the time. More. There has to be more. If we haven't finished the job, and the job, of course, is to bring Mashiach, if we haven't finished the job, so there's always more to do. But can that become depressing? No. Why not? When we understand who we are and what we're able to do. And that's what the Rebbe says in the Maimer. What is Moshe daven for? Moshe prays. Moshe looks at you and I. What does he see? He sees us from his point of view, a point of view of complete holiness, and he sees in us people who are lacking nothing in terms of their ability to accomplish that which they were sent to this world to accomplish. We lack nothing. Whatever it is we're supposed to do, we can do. And Moshe sees that in us. And he davens that we should see it in ourselves. That's Moshe's prayer. That every single one of us should understand clearly. We're created by Kadosh Baruch Hu, and if God asks us to accomplish certain things and to get things done in this lifetime, that's because he's given us the ability to do that. We have an unlimited ability to do whatever has to be done. And our accomplishment is not that which grants us some notion of being worth something. Exactly the opposite. Because we have a positive self-image, because we understand that we're created in the image of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore we lack nothing, we can go out and turn over the world. And that's the Torah's message. And that's a message where I won't be afraid of anything. I have time for one more quick story. Rabbi Groner passed away just over a month ago. Happened to have been blessed with having a very close relationship with him. And I went to visit him when I was last in Crown Heights, right after Yutes Kislev, Chav Kislev, just before Hanukkah. And he told me a number of stories. One of the stories he told me was as follows, and I'll tell it quickly and we'll end with this. There was an English businessman who came to the Rebbe and had a private audience with the Rebbe, and he asked the Rebbe to be his partner in business, meaning The Rebbe, he would give the Rebbe a certain percentage of whatever the profits of the business were that the Rebbe obviously would use for charitable purposes, and they would be in business together. And the Rebbe said, okay, fine. So they did it 1 year. He came at the end of the year. He explained to the Rebbe what the profits were. He gave the Rebbe's portion of those profits, and fine. He asked the Rebbe, can we do it for another year? The Rebbe said, yes. Fine. In the middle of the 3rd year, this gentleman ran into a certain problem. He called up Rabbi Groner. He said, Rabbi Groner, I want you to ask my partner a question because we have a problem in the business. What's that? I have $13 million of merchandise. He was a furrier, special type of fur. I have $13 million worth of merchandise sitting in the warehouse, and I can't get rid of it, and it's really affecting the business. What should I do? Okay. So Rabbi Groner went to ask the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, tell him he should buy $5 million more merchandise. Whoa. That was not the advice he was hoping for, and that was not the advice he was expecting. He didn't do it. He didn't listen to his partner's advice. He didn't buy the furs. Nothing changed. He called a few months later and said, please tell the Rebbe nothing's changed. I've got $13 million worth of fur in my warehouse, and they're not moving. The Rebbe said, this time buy $2 million worth of merchandise. More merchandise. Didn't buy it. He was a little worried. Didn't buy it. Ultimately, what happened? During that year, near the end of the year, a certain businessman came along, was looking for a certain type of fur, wanted specifically the type he had, paid full price, not wholesale, but retail price for the $13 million worth of furs. The guy made a terrific profit. He came to the Rebbe with his year-end profits, and he said, these are the profits I made, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to give the Rebbe his percentage, and can we do it again? 4th year. And the Rebbe said no. So he asked the Rebbe, why not? The Rebbe said, if you want to be my partner, you can't be afraid when times get tough. Times are a little difficult right now. Our job is not to be afraid. Our job is to understand that we've been given the power from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to deal with whatever it is we have to deal with successfully and ultimately turn the negative into positive. There are very, very many painful and negative aspects of the happenings of the last 2 months. There are also many, many positive aspects. We accentuate the positive, though we cry about the negative, and we know that we can change reality, change our own reality, change the reality in our house, change the reality in our own head, change the reality around us to the extent that we can. There's no limits to our abilities. God has created us with infinite abilities to change reality. That's our job. That's what we do with unlimited joy. And in the end, we'll see the fruits of it all with the coming of Mashiach. It should happen speedily in our days. Have a wonderful, wonderful Lag BaOmer, and only good news and simchas for you and your families. Only good news for all the Jews.